Hi, Sally Foley-Lewis back again for another episode, another video all about Spark, the self-leadership video series. And I'm absolutely excited to be with the amazing Michelle Berriman, who is the Executive Director of the Fundraising Institute for New Zealand, whose brain we're going to pick underneath all that beautiful pink hair. So welcome to the series, Michelle.
Kia ora, and thank you, Sally, for inviting me to be part of this very exciting series.
So before we jump into your wisdom and your expertise on everything self-leadership, tell me what you do and tell me all about the Fundraising Institute of New Zealand.
Yeah, so the Fundraising Institute of New Zealand is the peak body for fundraising in New Zealand. So we look after fundraisers and charities who are fundraising in New Zealand. We have kind of 3 or 4 main aspects of what we do. The first, we're there to provide education and best practice guidelines, ethics, advocacy. So we're there really to support the sector and the amazing work that all of our charities do to contribute to the generosity of everyday New Zealanders who support their favourite causes.
Yeah, I love that, and important work. You know, you're supporting those who are supporting others. So
absolutely, our role is fundraisers. I think change makers is much more powerful. We facilitate change, and so our role is to facilitate a donor's desire to make impact in the causes that they care about. And I think changing the rhetoric around fundraisers, you can empty a room pretty quickly when you say you're a fundraiser. And I think I'm a really strong advocate of changing that rhetoric. And actually, we are change makers and facilitators of change. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So tell me what you think, particularly from the context of fundraising and you being in the executive director role, what is self-leadership to you?
Well, it's interesting. I think when I was appointed a few years ago, I think it was challenging. I think I didn't represent what a typical leader, CEO of an organization might be. And I love disruption. And I think it's always nice my own journey is one of adversity and a real strong kind of resilience and survival. I've adopted an attitude of survival from quite a young age, and that's taken me right through my leadership. And I think being authentic, right from the beginning, people were like, wow, who is this Scottish chick with pink hair who's leading our organization? And I think in order to really resonate with our members and our audience, it was so important for me to be authentic, and I wear my heart on my sleeve. I tell it as it is, and I am me. I'm relationships is kind of my speciality, and I think leading strongly with relationships and good relationships is really important to me. And that's relationships with your team, your board, your suppliers, your members, everyone you work with. Forming relationships is the key to success.
Yeah, and your relationship with yourself as well.
Yeah.
You talk about how you're a survivor, and authenticity and being truly who you are is the way that works for you. To me, that sort of says then that then relies on the relationship you have with yourself and your self-awareness and the belief in yourself that if I can only be me, because when I'm being me, then the best of me gets to come forward. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's easy to be identified as the chick with the pink hair, and there's much more to me than that. But that the kind of the brand I've created it's taken me a long time to get to that identity and be confident of who I am and be proud of who I am. But there's still part of me, the motivation. I think over the last year in particular, I think I had a bit of a light bulb moment recently when someone asked me, we were discussing resilience, and someone said, why are you so resilient? And that's you can talk about the traits of resilience and what a resilient leader needs and how we behave as leaders. But actually, what makes you resilient is a really interesting question. And I think for me, I'm not driven by success. I think what motivates me is the fear of failure. And I think being honest with myself about that has has actually been a bit of a game changer in terms of my leadership. I understand my vulnerabilities, and I've also realized it's okay to just sometimes be good. I set the bar really high for myself. And last year, I've never worked harder than ever, but it came at a cost. And, it's adopting an attitude of survival and resilience and backing yourself, and, that desire to always kind of be operating at 150%, you've got to do this, it actually comes at a cost. And, late last year, I did kind of hit the ground, it was a lot, and you can't keep that momentum. It's not sustainable. And sometimes it's okay just to be good enough.
Yeah.
And not excellent.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You want to have high standards, you expect things of yourself, and you want to deliver, and you want to be seen to be as well. There's a little bit of us, that little bit of ego shows up. You've got a brand that you've created that you feel good in your skin in, and so you have to maintain that. Heaven forbid you change your mind. Because all these characteristics or all these complexities come into play. I totally hear you. I mean, in early days I've burnt out a couple of times, and so I absolutely resonate with what you're saying. And I think that you having that light bulb moment, and thank you for sharing it, about that question about what makes you resilient, I think is a really important one, because it does come into the big vessel of understanding self-leadership. Because if we don't have that self-awareness, and we don't actually know, well, what does keep me resilient, or what do I rely on to be resilient, or what makes me resilient, plus all the other things like what motivates me, what are my values, what are my expectations and standards of myself compared to others, and myself compared to yesterday. That all comes into that play. And I think the more we're open to those lessons and those light bulb moments, the better we'll always get. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when it comes to the impact of self-leadership, particularly on things like courage or influence or confidence of a leader, what do you think, what role do you think it plays?
It's huge. Like I said, when I first started at FINZ, there was a mixed response. And I think our first annual conference, we host an annual conference every year. And I took the decision at the first conference I was part of that I would do the keynote speech. And I decided to tell my story, my own personal story, which was my reason why. And it was incredibly confronting. It spoke about mental health issues, suicide attempt as a young person. It really did take me through the journey of my life. But I didn't tell my story to poor me. It was actually to explain my reason why. And at the end, it was just overwhelming. There was members in the audience in tears, and I didn't expect such a positive response. But what it did do was it set the tone for how I wanted to lead our institute. I think institutes tend to have a certain expectation of what a national institute should be, and we all turn up to conference in our best clothes and looking to I'm sharing our best self and look at all this amazing work I'm doing, when actually conference should be a time where you're in a room with all the people in your sector. Nobody else understands what it is that you do, but everyone in this room does. And it should be an opportunity to come and say and share your failures, share your vulnerabilities, and go, actually, this is really tough. And I think that was the moment that things changed for our organization. I think everyone resonated with someone who was leading the organization that was a real human, that had a real story and had a reason why. And so many people had conversations at that conference that they'd never had before. And it was amazing to witness. And I think that's taken us through the last couple of years of the approach that, that's how I want to lead. And it's really worked.
And sorry, a bit of echo. You've given permission for for others in that event to also just that little, even if it's just a little bit, wipe away a little bit more of the mask and give themselves permission to maybe have that even one layer down, deeper conversation. So your willingness to be vulnerable, I think, is again a gift that you've given. And I totally get it's not about poor me. It's about, this is who I am and this is where I've come from. And if there's a lesson in that for you, then as it's been lessons for myself, then take them. So that's huge, Michelle. And I want to acknowledge you for doing that, because not everyone's ready to share their story at all, let alone on a stage to open a conference.
I think for me the most frightening part was my board at the time. I hadn't kind of prepared them for that. I didn't tell them. I guess I was scared, and it's terrifying. I remember sitting there waiting to go on stage, and they'd flown over one of these amazing speakers from the US, and there was four women doing the keynotes. I was sitting there going, but what I found really interesting was, while we were all sitting there, these were women that I admired, and I was terrified. But when I looked at them and we spoke, they all felt the same. And I looked at them and I said, "Are you nervous?" And they're like, "Of course." And actually, when you see powerful, strong women that you admire feeling the same as you feel when you're about to go on stage, again, it's a moment of I am not an imposter. I suffer hugely from imposter syndrome. And I spoke about that at conference, because I left school at 15, I've got no formal education. I think that's always something that's kind of sat on my shoulder and thought, oh, I don't have a degree like all these amazing people. I've just worked really hard to where I've got to. And so that's always held me back mentally. But I've broken through that now by being able to share that I'm just as kind of, I deserve to be where I am because of the hard work, without a degree or a piece of paper. But I think imposter syndrome is real for all women. And I think it was really nice to see them feel the same way that I did.
Yeah, truly. It's a human moment, isn't it? Definitely.
I think I do want to add as well, I think it's also really important to recognize that not everyone should share. I strongly believe that in everything you do, you should always give a little bit of yourself away. But that doesn't mean that you tell, it's okay not to tell everyone about your personal kind of hardships. Some people don't want to do that, and that's absolutely fine. And that isn't the only way to be successful in relationships. But I do think that when you meet someone who's genuine and authentic, you can tell, and it doesn't have to be about personal, deep issues of adversity, but just about who you are. And I think it's so important that every conversation you have, you give a bit of yourself away. You don't talk shop all the time. And some of the best relationships I've taken with me through all my jobs, my suppliers, my tech teams, all of these guys, they know that no matter where I am, they know my values because they know who I am. And so wherever I go, they know I'm going to be doing what aligns with them.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's about, when you do give a little bit away of yourself, and I totally agree, it doesn't have to be everything. And we don't do therapy from the stage as such. But I think that's courage. You not telling your board first and still trusting your gut. Somewhere inside of you said, this is still the right message to send. So there's some courage in there as well. And I think that, that story you've just shared is a great example of where self-leadership and courage come into play. Because even though in the face of not being sure what the board would say, in the face of being in a room with people you admire and seeing their imposter syndrome and the energy play with your imposter syndrome in that moment, and still you get up there and give that message, I think is amazing. And I think that's a great way to also show that coming out of the other side of that, how did you feel? Like where was your confidence on the other side of that presentation?
I was just so grateful for how it was received. There was, I think what was so amazing was those that were very doubtful, that to see the change in them was quite remarkable. And actually a couple of them apologized. And I felt a little bit sad for that, actually, because they found out who I was. It's interesting, isn't it? But they themselves felt that they judged somebody without really understanding, and I think that was really nice. I mean, it was so well received. It was just, it was a couple of years ago now, and I think a few kind of managers over the time have often said to me, Michelle, you wear your heart on your sleeve at my review. And I think sometimes, on one occasion, I think it was a positive thing, but most of the time what they're saying to me was, you're too emotional. And it always confused me, because I thought, you really don't understand good relationship fundraising. You really don't understand good leadership, because actually wearing your heart in your sleeve that is what I've just said. You're giving yourself, you are giving a bit of who you are away. And I think so many leaders and CEOs of organizations, they feel that there's this expectation that we don't do that. We're professional. Well, I mean, what does professional mean? Does that professional mean you can't be human? That you can't show emotion? I mean, I just don't buy into any of that. So
I'm laughing because I totally agree with you. And it's like the old, I don't hear it as much now, but it used to be, just keep your emotions outside. Don't bring your emotions to work. And I'm like, well, out of which hole do I take them? We are a bag of emotions. We are a bag of feelings. And I just think that they also are incredibly important, because they'll help us to they're part of the process. They're part of who we are, and they're part of how we show up every day. And I totally agree with you about wearing your heart on your sleeve. Yes, full well that some days that will burn you. You will get burnt because you do that. But most days it's the right thing to do. It's again back to who you are, and it serves you, and you'll get more you'll get deeper relationships out of that. I remember years ago, I had a mentor say to me, it was in a leadership program, in the dinosaur ages, but it has stuck with me for years. And it was, you cannot hate the person whose story you know.
Yeah.
And hate's a strong word, but that's I think that was deliberately powerful and deliberately used word. But it has stuck with me, because if I know you, then doesn't mean I'm going to agree with you, doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have the same values. But if I get to know you, then I'm going to have a deeper level of respect for what you're trying to, do. I'm going to have a little bit more respect for your journey in this world. And so, we cut each other a bit more slack. That's
what I was going to say. Yeah, there's some as part of developing relationships comes forgiveness of mistakes. I make mistakes. I remember when I first started, I had so much to do, and I'd let down a really big sponsor. And the first thing I did was get on the phone and say, I am so sorry, but this is what I'm going to do to fix it. Yeah. And they responded and said, nobody has ever got in touch so quickly, not only apologized, but had a plan to fix it immediately. And I think that's really important too, is owning your mistakes, going, that I'm sorry, taking ownership of the failures and fixing them. I mean, it's fine, we all make mistakes, but I think sometimes when leaders are too, I can't admit I've done this mistake, and we'll find, just own it. And I think when people see that honesty and transparency, forgiveness comes with that, and it just builds stronger relationships, and people actually want you to do better. We had to do an emergency appeal last year because it was the first time ever we are a registered charity, and we raised about $50,000. It was the world's first ever peer-to-peer ask, and 80% of our donations came from overseas, which was incredible. And a lot of the comments that came in said, this is for you, Michelle. We don't want your hard work to go to waste. And so people were giving to support me, which I think it's a little bit scary, because I don't want, I'm not the organization, but actually a good leader will take the organization with them. And my role now is to make sure the organization is just as good as its leader. Do you know what? I don't mean I don't mean that in an ego way, but I think I've used my relationships and my brand, and I think it's the organization now has to shine, and what we do has to shine. But I think good leaders make their organizations get to that point.
Yeah, well, that's your influence. I mean,
Yeah.
you've walked your talk. You've got the confidence in yourself to be able to own your mistakes, and smart enough to also say, this is what my plan is. You build those relationships and through your authenticity, which means that you actually come with some influence, and so you're able to then do that peer-to-peer emergency fundraising. And so I think that's a really great example of those three elements of, confidence, influence, and courage being intertwined with self-leadership. So, wow, and good on you. And I don't think that's an ego thing either. I think you're smart enough to know, okay, they're doing this for me. Now, and you're smart enough to not leave it in that ego space either, and go, all right, this was for me. People are telling me it's for me. How do I now transfer this, or at least bring the organization with me?
Yes.
And I think that's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah. Yeah. So is there some sort of event, like even if it was COVID, I'm really interested to know about when a leader has had their spark as such, slightly dampened, and they've needed to reignite themselves and reignite their self-leadership in particular. What did you do? And, what are the lessons that you learned from that?
I definitely learned that I can cope with disruption. I definitely learned that adopting an attitude of survival is part of resilience. But I also, you do hit. I think it's hard because well-being is so important. I'm a mum of 5 kids, and so I think my motivation is there for them, but I've got a lot of teenagers, and so I think it's really challenging that you can. For me, I can be really struggling in my personal life and with the family, and then I, jump on screen and I'm Michelle, and I think I don't know. I think I think when you see that you've succeeded and that you've done, like the emergency appeal, we had a great conference last year. We did lots of every milestone that you achieve, you do have to stop and reset though, because with every success, I always feel that you have this kind of real low after a big event, and it's actually a real thing. But I quite often physically get sick. I'll get a cold or I'll get run down, and I think it does take it takes an impact on your body when you've been running with adrenaline, and then it was amazing and you're buzzing and it was so successful, and then the next day you just come crashing to the ground. And how do you get your spark back again? Well, I think it's really difficult. I think you've just got to reset and refocus on your core purpose, remind yourself what it is you do and to do it well. But it takes a lot of strength to keep going. And I think I'm just writing an article at the moment about it, actually. I think last year we all thought, oh, we're so glad that 2020 is over. And this, I don't know if we all thought on the 31st of December, everything was going to change and go back to normal. But the reality is that this year, I think, is almost going to be a little bit harder, because we all reacted in a way that wasn't in our strategy. We were never taught to last year. That global pandemic was across the board. It actually really evened out the leadership. Like there was no leadership course prepared you for that. It really evened out the kind of experience there. But we learned with it. We moved quickly, and that in itself, the adrenaline and that we can do this attitude was incredible. But now keeping the momentum for another year or 2 or 3 years still, we're going to see this impact, particularly in our sector. How do we keep that momentum, and how do we keep that passion and that determination to keep going? And I'm just not sure, actually. Well-being.
Yeah, I think oh, sorry. I think there's a bit of an echo. Sorry. I totally agree. And when you said 31st of December, I actually said in a keynote speech recently, who woke up on the 1st of January hoping it was another Y2K and it was all good again. Yeah, no such luck. And I think you've really nailed it. I like that perspective, is that, when it hit, we I hate the word, but we pivoted. We had to drop the strategy. It was an emergency. It's, it's when your kid needs 000 or, the emergency ambulance to come. It was that kind of sense. And I think it really just strips away the unimportant really quickly. Whereas now it's like, well, what's important? because we don't know, are we going into another lockdown? Are we not going to lockdown? How long will the vaccine take? When do we get our vaccine? Are we in what tier and what group, depending on what country we're in? You know, it may still be another year or so before we get a vaccine, depending on where we are. So I think that distinction between reacting and now being professionally and positively and trying to be a proactive responder is really, really hard right now. I think, And I think that comes back to then, you know, as thinking about the concept of self-leadership, you know, where's your resilience, you know? So yeah. And what's going to make you resilient? So and
making sure you have those people around you. I think it's really important to ask for help. It's really important to have your peer leader, to have those people you admire. I've managed to create a wonderful group of people all around the world who were my heroes, actually, that I now have developed a relationship with. And I make sure I check in with them all, you know, every other week, because you really need that peer-to-peer support. You need to be able to say, oh, this is shit, I am really struggling. And I think being able to ask for help, know what kind of help and support you want, and also, you know, to ask authentically and honestly. And that was one of my biggest learnings, was to take advice from others and to take ideas from others, work with others. And I think having your peers to really reach out to is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so how do you help fire up others? How do you get them to really ramp up and fire up their self-leadership?
Yeah, with my team, I approach my team the same, you know, again, with a high level of trust. You know, I think it's been a game changer. We can work wherever we want. And I think that's been a big game changer in the dynamics of having to be around an office. So, you know, my team operate under a high level of trust. I'm not clock watching anyone. You know, it's always been for me, always about, there's a job to do, get the job done. Where, when, how, that's entirely up to you. Checking in with them and things. And I think celebrating success, and it's not done enough, particularly at board level, but really celebrating those successful moments and stopping, pausing and rewinding. I just recently reposted on one of our social media of a moment from conference last year that was incredible. I think it's too easy to keep going, and you keep going and keep going. And so we put up a video from our conference just to remind everyone, hey guys, stop, take a moment, look how amazing this was. And I think you have to be able to stop and reflect and remind everyone of the good things that you've done. And if you can show that visually through a video or whatever, and go, hey, let's kind of rewind on what went, you know, the good things. Celebrating success is so important.
Yeah, I love that, trust and celebrating success. And I totally agree about both those concepts. And we do move on too quickly. We don't just, you know, I like to say, get our fingers all pruny just for a little moment while we bask in how good it was. And we should be giving ourselves permission to do that, because it's what makes us feel good about why we're connected to a purpose or an organization or a teams or the work that we do. So I love that.
It absolutely does. And I think there's little things that I, you know, with just sending cards, you know, a couple of people sent me flowers recently. We were successful with some funding that we got, and out of the blue, there was a bunch of flowers on my doorstep when I got home. And I do the same for other people, cards and flowers, and you know, it's just so important to kind of personalize those, if you know, note those key moments and reaffirm those people that support you and that you care about.
Absolutely. So just look, I think that you and I could have a chat all day long, but I want to respect your time. I've got one more question for you, and that is, what do you wish you knew about, you know, self-leadership for yourself the first time you stepped into a leadership role?
Wow, that is a big question. I wish I knew that I didn't have to prove myself every single day. I think I wish I realized that I should have taken a breath, that it's okay to take a breath quite often, and to slow down. I'm someone who, I remember at my interview, they said, so why should you get the job? And my answer to them was, because I get shit done. And they kind of laughed, and that was true. And yeah, I think I constantly, try and achieve too much. And I think realizing that doing something well is better than doing too much, or that might kind of, where there's too many opportunities for the ball to be dropped. I think it's important to do what you do and do it well rather than doing too much.
Yeah, I love that. I resonate with that, because in my early days and my first management roles, I was a bit of a bull in a china shop.
Yeah, so. You're desperate to prove yourself.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Yeah. So thank you so much. I really appreciate spending some time with you and learning more about what you do and who you are and your perspective on self-leadership, plus a little bit of insight into the Fundraising Institute New Zealand. So any last words you'd like to share?
Just remember that it's okay sometimes to, last Friday at 2:30 in the afternoon, I put on my Sesame Street pajamas, I shut my laptop, I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and it's okay to take some time for you, and be kind to yourself.
Yeah, definitely. It's about filling up your tank so that you're running on full. I love that. Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate what you do and the messages that you share. And thank you for being on the Spark Self-Leadership video series. So thank you.
Kia ora, Sally. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. This is Sally Foley-Lewis, and stay tuned. There'll be more videos in this fantastic Spark Self-Leadership video series, just asking you the question, what makes you spark your self-leadership? Bye for now.